Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 17th meeting of the Planning and Environmental Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for Council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Moving on to number 1, disclosures of pecuniary interest. Anyone, committee? I see none. I'd like to move on to the consent items and ask if anyone would like to pull any of the items. I know Councillor Kawabaga would like to speak or ask questions to 2.3, which is the application at 185 Queens Avenue. So I'm going to be pulling that one. And I would like to pull 2.6 Masonville Transit Village Secondary Plan so we could get some comments from the city planner. Other than that, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if I need to pull it necessarily. I have some comments on 2.2 on the PPS review, and maybe some comes out of that some suggestions, but I don't think we need to change any motions or anything like that. So I'll speak to it at the time.
Okay, so we won't pull it. We'll leave it on the consent items to be approved. So if I can get someone from the committee to move the motion. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner. Yes, I would think that's probably a good thing to do. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to 2.2 and the provincial policy statement review, I thank you very much for doing a very thorough review of the revisions proposed and the red line revisions. It was really clear to be able to, the way it was laid out, be able to follow where the recommendations came from. And a lot of them are rather alarming, and I agree with staff's position that in certain circumstances these kind of run counter to the municipal interests. If I were to be a little less cynical, I would say this is a plan for developers, written by developers, but in this case, my concerns rest around certainly the climate change challenges that are identified in here, speaking solely to mitigation strategies and not necessarily into kind of bolstering infrastructure and protecting municipal resources, rather than our ability to decrease inputs into CO2 emissions and the impacts of municipalities on climate change, rather than the impacts of climate change on municipalities. The other part in there was that was really important was talking about where the impacts on municipal finance were adversely impacted, having a 25-year growth horizon rather than a 20-year growth horizon, and our ability to be able to, I guess, hold growth and decrease sprawl to the greatest extent possible is kind of undermined by saying a 25-year horizon and changing wording from shall to should. Now, perhaps through you, Madam Chair, a question. Weren't we held a bit more to account, and it seemed like industry as well sought the clarity from us to make sure that our official plan, when we did the London plan, got rid of as many of the shoulds and made shalls as often as possible. And that was directed from the province on their review of our official plan. So it seems strange that the province's plan would go to softer language. Am I recalling that correctly?
Who wants to take that one? Mr. Barrett?
Through the chair, maybe I'll dance around a portion of that for a little bit. because with respect to the specifics on the London plan appeals, it was a combination of both. There were places where, in fact, the shalls was what prevailed, and in some places the shoulds prevailed. With respect to this report, first, before I get going, I just want to reintroduce, I don't know if I did this the last two times we've been here, but Joanne Lee and Ben Morin, who are two of the planners who are with us, who have been responsible on following through on Bill 108 and now the PPS changes. So those are the two who've been doing a lot of the background work for us on this. First off, though, one of the big changes in this that the shall be consistent with is still there, and that was one thing that even in previous go-rounds we've been very concerned that might change. The province has maintained that as the test for the provincial policy statement. So all municipal decisions shall be consistent with the provincial policy statement. One part, though, that is a little concerning in what they've come out is that there is a provision that was a policy which is still there, but in sort of the how to read section rather than as a policy. And that was around municipal policies being, their ability to go beyond those within the PPS. And there was an explicit policy that these were a minimum, but in fact municipalities could develop policies and set standards that went beyond these. That language is still there, but not as a standalone policy. It's in the how to use and how to read the plan section. So that's a little bit of a change as to where they've changed that sort of status with respect to these policies. And with that, I think Mr. Fleming might have some other comments as well.
Madam Chair, I'd just say, and maybe being a little bit more blunt, that yes, you know, if we do take a status quo type of approach, the way that we're growing as a city or across the province, in those places that aren't constrained to continue to grow outward, it will continue to create issues from a climate crisis perspective, reliance on the automobile and a number of other factors. So the concern I think raised by the councillor is shared by us in planning that to go to a 25-year horizon, to have a little bit softer line in terms of what that means relative to the current 20-year and a fairly hard line. It's a concern from a planning perspective, and I won't say that this is exclusive to the City of London and the planning community. There's others that just got back from Ontario Professional Planners Institute conference, and there was a lot of discussion about this issue as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. I was reading that section that seemed to allow us still to have standards that exceed the PPS. So at a minimum, the PPS standards shall prevail. And I think that one of the challenges with that 25-year horizon is that becomes the minimum. At a minimum, there should be 25 years of inventoried land rather than at a minimum 20 years. So we couldn't have a more aggressive, conservative approach in our own statements to say 20 years shall be it. Could we use tools such as holding provisions in terms of the orderly development of lands, holding provisions in such a way that might be able to offset some of the negative impacts of a 25-year inventory of lands?
Through the chair, one of the places where we're not too sure about that, but there is an existing policy that talks about servicing to be carried out in a coordinated and cost-efficient manner. That particular explicit policy is proposed to be deleted. So there appears to be some lessening of some of those things where you can build on some of those policies that exist within the PPS that would allow you to ensure through policy and then through your practice, the coordination of the delivery of service and the impacts of development. That being said, there's nothing that would say that you cannot use holding provisions to do that. It's just that one policy that talked about that explicit tie is proposed to be deleted.
Thanks. Other things that seem to be kind of triggers in this that aim in a way that really dilutes the effectiveness of the provincial policy statements, which were pretty strong to begin with, and going in the right direction. And now at this, plus the Places to Grow and the More Homes, More Choices Act and all of those things, sorry, not Places to Grow, that was before, that all of this kind of together serves to really challenge municipalities in their way, their ability to finance themselves through development charges or through the infrastructure that we might need to place in order to support growth as we go through. One of the key themes through this is to satisfy market demand, and our ability to be able to balance that with, market demand is absolutely important, but being able to provide for residents in a way that's sustainable and doesn't overburden them with large tax increases because of growth that outpaces our ability to maintain infrastructure in a compact and sustainable way. If I were to make a couple suggestions, because through the report it really hits home on the climate change parts. I'm not sure if it says enough about how much it impacts our ability to finance, to maintain municipal finances. And the way I read through this is that it would have a fair impact. I think it is identified in the report, but in the submission itself, it doesn't seem to hit that note as strong. So perhaps that would just be my recommendation, if there's a chance to put those in there and really create, because that seems to be one of the drivers that the provincial government right now seems to be most concerned about, is cost and cost to taxpayers, and how do we do that in such a way that we identify for them that this will be a problem in one way or another. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, for those comments. Any other comments? I have a comment, if the committee will allow me, from the chair. I just want to go back to emphasizing the direction that the PPS is going in when it talks about a changing climate and how it encourages municipalities to become proactive. But I really agree with the report coming to us about how it's focusing more on adapting to climate change as opposed to how we can mitigate and be proactive. So I really want to thank staff for their comments. I do have a quick question, though, as it relates to the setbacks in the PPS. And just because this has been a concern in my ward about minimum setbacks on agricultural land, it's 2.4.3 on minimum distance. And it's a really, I agree with the staff report saying it's a bit unclear. So my question, I guess, to staff, does that mean that there's no formula, or where are we going with these minimum setbacks? Because I know there was an application before us a while ago with some livestock and abattoir, and those minimum distances were something that were important to be maintained, but I'm not sure where we're going with these new changes.
Through the chair, I'm just trying to find the specific reference just so I can make reference back to it. Through the chair, so it's the non-agricultural uses within prime ag areas. So the current policy speaks to planning authorities only permitting non-agricultural uses within prime agricultural areas. And for limited non-residential uses, there were two tests. The land did not comprise specialty crop area, and that the proposed use complied with the minimum distance separation criteria. They're proposing to remove that second criterion from that consideration for non-residential uses. But it would say that instead, the impacts from any new or expanding non-agricultural use on surrounding agricultural operations are to be avoided, and where not possible, minimized and mitigated to the extent feasible and informed by provincial guidelines. So it's taking away the actual explicit application of the MDS where you would get a number through your calculation, and removing that as a criterion and saying instead that you would inform your separation distance through an application of the provincial guidelines.
Thank you for that, and I think that's my concern, is about taking away that number to sort of set the parameters, and anyhow, I want to thank staff for their report, and Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to staff. So we've gone through these kinds of consultations in the recent past as new legislation has been coming down. And I think, through you, Madam Chair, previous legislation, Bill 108, has come out the same sort of way with a whole lot of sort of very alarming changes that would have a lot of repercussions for municipalities in general and the City of London in particular. So but I believe that through the discussion, through some of the back and forth, that the province stepped back on some of those changes. Is this really early on in the process, or do you have a feeling this is going to change really quickly? And do you have a feeling that we'll have that same kind of dialogue and hopefully some response from the province, recognizing the concerns that we have?
Through the chair, I would say, I think through this consultation process, we'll have a good opportunity to have some meaningful input and make some meaningful changes with the province. I actually attended with a few of my colleagues a few weeks ago. The province came with quite a few staff to explain some of the changes to us and have us break out in tables with all of different Southwestern Ontario municipalities. And I think that went really well. I think our Bill 108 changes were received well, and I think that there were discussions at the OPPI conference last week. So I think the province is listening, and we'll have an opportunity to hopefully make an impact with this.
Great. So again, I reiterate what my colleagues have said. It's a very good report. It's very clear, easy to follow, easy to understand. So I'm hopeful that you'll have the same kind of success with your dialogue through the PPS. I also want to agree with Councillor Turner that really highlighting the financial implications for municipalities for some of these proposed changes, it's really important in addition to the climate issues.
Thank you. So we can vote. Oh, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Switching topics a little bit, I think my colleagues covered that report very well. I wanted to just ask briefly about the building permit report. I'm just keeping an eye on how the actual number of units and the kind of units that are being built are coming in compared to what we had forecast in the DC study. And it seems like a pretty consistent pattern that we have a lower proportion of single family and a higher proportion of townhouses and a higher proportion of apartment buildings. And this is now, I mean, if 2019 finishes the way it's going right now, it's going to be quite significantly different from what we've been projecting. I know this is just the very first year of the new DC bylaw, but considering that it's happened a couple of years now, and I know the apartment side in particular is pretty spiky, I'm more concerned about the single family staying relatively low as an overall proportion. Do our staff have any concerns about those forecasts and our ability to actually recoup the kind of DC revenue that we're looking for over the next 5 years? Because I'm worried because 2019 should be pretty accurate, right? Like that's the least forecasty of all the estimates, right?
Mr. Yeoman, are you up for that one?
I am, Madam Chair. Thank you. Through you. It is a very good point the councillor is making. We are monitoring, of course, in relation to the DC projections. One of the challenges we have is that the projection that's prepared is put together in 5-year increments, and then it's annualized. And so the annual projection may not be an accurate reflection of what occurs in that given year, but it should work out over the period. What we are doing, though, is every year we come to you with the Growth Management Implementation Strategy update. That's a key input into the GMIS is where are we in terms of the growth that we've been occurring, the associated revenues as well. So we'll be reporting out to you on that. We are monitoring.
Okay, I look forward to that report. And I just wanted to say, definitely on track for another very big year in terms of construction. Obviously, there's the rather unique circumstance of Maple Leaf Foods facility, which is in here in the report, but on all the other measures too, it's another very strong year for construction activity, and good luck to the building folks keeping up with all that work.
Thank you, committee, for your comments, and Councillor Turner.
Just a quick question with respect to 2.5, the 56 High Street. Would that have required notification within a notification trigger distance for planning applications? It's a removal of a holding provision.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we provide notification for holding provision rules.
I ask because I live fairly close to that, and if I were in the notification distance, I would recuse, but I didn't receive one, so I will vote on this matter. Thanks.
Hopefully you'll be safe. And with that, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving on to 2.3, this is 185 Queens Avenue parking lot redevelopment. We are receiving this recommendation, and we are also directing to undertake a procurement process to find a potential partner to redevelop the parking area at 185 Queen Street. So I know the Councillor Calvaga is here with a few questions, if the committee would allow me to go to the councillor. Welcome to planning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask questions in your committee, as I'm not part of the committee myself. I just had a question for staff through you, Chair, and it was around the parking lot redevelopment. And before I go on, I just, with a whole bunch of questions, I just want to recognize that I realize that we're in a procurement process right now, and so my questions may be relevant or not relevant, but I felt that it was important that I asked them, seeing that a lot of on the report is stemming from a 2017 parking downtown parking strategy. So some of the questions I had was that I know that in the report, in the strategy, we're trying to add 200 to 300 more parking spaces in the central and southwest of downtown to meet demand. And so, as the new council, given that we've declared a climate change emergency in our city, I had some concerns around adding 200 to 300 more parking spaces. However, I do want to say that I think having a multi-level parking lot is an amazing idea, and I would love to see that in our city. I'm just more so concerned about adding more 200 to 300 parking spaces in the downtown. I do believe that we do have ample parking spaces in the downtown. That's probably not a popular, or it may not be the same feelings across the board, but that's my opinion. I was just wondering how, this is going to affect us. We've declared climate emergency in our city, and adding 200 to 300 more parking spaces downtown, to me, I think maybe there needs to be more conversations around that. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to have that conversation, but I just thought that it's on the report, and we should come in and have that discussion. And like another question I had was, would this strategy be one that maybe we could look at in terms of replacing surface lots instead of, I really like this idea of having multi-level parking, and it could possibly even be like a multi-use building. I don't know. I think we were discussing earlier, and that's something that we've thought that this could be. I just wanted to know a little bit more on where we are at and how this interferes with our climate emergency, and whether or not there's interest in working with private parking owners to work with the city. And also want to say that I really like well, maybe it's a question actually before I say that. Is this going to be city owned as well? And is this a strategy that we're approaching to reduce surface lots, or this is in addition to what we already have?
So I'm not sure if I've written down a number of questions, I guess relating to this application. The first question coming out of this recommendation is it's city-owned, and maybe adding a little bit more exactly what this development will look like. And then secondly, moving on, given the 2017 strategy now with the, the changing climate, do we have to revisit it, or is there a need, or where are we with the strategy? Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you can see from our last report, and I think going forward as well, at the top of our minds is climate emergency. That's something that Council declared, and we will be coming forward with a report very soon to talk about how we might move forward on a number of different perspectives relative to climate crisis or climate emergency. I think one of the best things that you can do from a sustainability perspective to mitigate climate impact is to have a really strong, great downtown, a place where all of your transit can focus if you have significant employment, a place where people want to live and then have access to different types of mobility forms other than the automobile. So I think that's one of the things that we need to keep top of mind is making sure that our downtown is vital and vibrant. We have a lot of surface parking lots in our downtown, and those surface parking lots aren't great from a pedestrian perspective, and they also present an opportunity for redevelopment. And so, as the parking strategy would suggest, we have the opportunity to have a structure, a parking structure that is included within and mixed with residential uses, commercial uses, perhaps at grade, to allow for that kind of supply of parking and pave the way for the redevelopment of other surface lots. This has been pointed out by the councillor. The downtown parking strategy actually identifies this site, site as within the priority, the #1 priority area for parking supply. So you could call it center ice as a location for parking structure that can allow for convenient parking for businesses, so for those that are going to those businesses as well as employees. So it's a great location, and I think the way that we look at it is that as a mixed use, it's a contribution to the downtown as a perhaps city-controlled, and we're going to leave the option open, parking run facility. We have the opportunity to do things like reduce rates on rideshare. We have the opportunity to provide bicycle parking and tie in other features that might allow for more of that sort of sustainable lens that goes beyond just automobile parking. And finally, I think that this kind of structure in this strategic location may allow for strategic pricing relative to events or trying to help with attracting people to the core. The last thing I'll say is we've recently been preparing for a core area action plan, and myself and my staff have been doing a lot of interviewing of people throughout the downtown and Londoners in general, and we have heard, whether it's statistically backed up or not, we have heard a lot about a lack of parking or a lack of convenient parking. So I think perception is something that is important, and to have a facility like this that's coordinated in such an accessible and convenient location could really be a positive thing. So that's where we're coming from in the report. You'll see those kinds of notions embedded in the report, and we think that it's although parking is not something that you would think of top of mind when talking about sustainability and climate crisis. In this context, we think that it can fit.
Councillor Calvaga, any follow-up?
Thank you. Thanks, through you, Chair, to staff for answering my question. I just wanted to throw in another question. That was the comment I was making, and like, I'm happy to hear that you've heard that there's a demand on parking, because I only hear the other side, that there's too much parking. Maybe that could be looked at differently. So again, I really appreciate this approach that we're taking. I do, however, still want to know if we, because this is only one, and I'm hoping that we could have more than one in the future, but would this new way of doing parking replace all these surface lots that we'd have? Maybe we could look at, I think you did kind of mention that. And what would be, or are there any incentives that we're going to be doing around getting private parking lots to take maybe, to redevelop their parking lot, surface lots? Another concern that I've heard a lot from the community is people would like to see more city-owned parkings, because when we are navigating parking that is not city-owned, there are a lot of issues and concerns that I've received from people that I can't necessarily respond to because it's privately owned, and I always have to direct them to go and talk to the private owner. I'm not going to mention any names, but it's a concern. I've been here for almost a year now, and I've heard it like from the first day I got elected to this minute. It's a huge concern. Whenever we have major events happening in the downtown, it's quite often that I hear people complain of the way parking was for them, knowing that it's not a city owned parking. So if we controlled parking, or not controlled, because that sounds weird, but if we had more city-owned parkings, I think we would have a better handle on prices, on different things we can do also to promote, to kind of encourage people to be in certain areas where certain businesses have been having a lot more construction than others, and we can kind of get creative around how we can encourage more people to support local businesses. And also, I think for me, knowing that we have a climate emergency that we have in our city, I really wanted to know that this is not adding, a whole bunch of new parking because it doesn't really encourage people to get out of their cars if we create more parking. So another question, so I think the last question I had, or possibly a comment, as you bring back the report to let us know how this is going to fit with the new agenda that this new council has taken. I'm also looking to see what the timeline on building is going to be, because I wonder if, we're going to set one, because we don't want it to just end up being a plan and then it doesn't get done, and it's just another hurdle that we have in the downtown, as we have many hurdles. So I know that you've been working on a core area report, and I've given you a lot of feedback and we've worked together with the mayor and different people to get this going. So I look forward to seeing that report, and I think that I have so much feedback from the community on what we can do to improve, and I know that we're going to be hosting also a town hall as well, where John Fleming will also be invited to speak to the community, and just wanting to have a lot of the concerns that we have moving forward in a sustainable way heard from our community, and both from staff and from different members of council as well, who have also expressed some of the concerns that they have, adding more parking and keeping in mind that we have declared a climate emergency. So I know that this is a consent item, but I just wanted to just let those ideas and that conversation marinate in people's minds as we move forward with this. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. And if I'd like to go to staff, if staff has a follow-up?
I'll be really quick, and then I'll, if I could, through you, Madam Chair, just invite my colleagues in the back row there to say a couple words on parking. But first of all, on the incentives question, we do have financial incentives for development in the core, and we've seen people recently take up those incentives and develop on some vacant sites. And I think that's where we all see it as a win-win-win when we get vacant sites, no heritage buildings being lost, vibrancy, 24-hour feet on the street in the core. We also have policies in place relative to temporary surface parking lots that keep getting extended over and over and over again. And these are in those areas of the downtown that don't have the same kind of demand or deficiency of supply of parking that this location would. And so council has been starting on that process of turning down some of those continual extensions. And the last thing I'll say before turning it over through you is the RFP, RFP that would go along with this, what we're proposing is very tight requirements around constructing within a short timeline, or whoever the proponent is that ultimately receives this, there would be penalties and possible reversion back to the municipality. So I know the city manager's very adamant about this, that this is an important asset, an important location, and if we're to go through an RFP process, we need to make sure that whoever does win that process acts in short term. And with that, through you, I'll pass it over to my colleagues.
Mr. Kostifis?
Sure, I'll take some additional information, I guess, if I can. We don't control all the lots, obviously, in the downtown. We only control a small proportion. I believe it's about 17%, I think, of the lots or available spaces in the downtown. We do have a number of partnerships as well with privately managed lots that we, or privately owned lots that we manage for them. And that gives us a little bit of more control, I guess, on those privately owned lots. But with respect to true privately owned and managed lots, we have very limited ability to actually control pricing or any of those issues that you raised, the councillor raised through her conversation. With respect to, I believe, the incentives, we've talked about those, and Mr. Fleming raised that. The parking strategy itself, there is a 200 to 300 space requirement over the next 20 or some odd years, but it's not necessarily just us building a parking garage. It's things like this that we're bringing forward that will help us achieve those number of units, and hopefully that will be expanded to other lots if we can, if this is successful. In absence of that, we will be bringing forward also some a funding model for the operating budget so that we can fund and partner for these types of initiatives in the future. Again, not necessarily building our own city lot, but maybe partnering and investing our money elsewhere. Hopefully that captures some of the questions that were raised.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Councillor Squire.
I just want to thank you very much for this report. It's something certainly I'm very keen to see happen, and I think you made some really important points. I think the one for me is that a parking lot is no longer has to be just a parking lot. It can be a lot of things, and I was really taken by your comments about bicycles, because I think one of the things we are missing in London and downtown, people tell me this over and over again, is bicycle security. And there really aren't many places where there's bicycle security, where you can ride your bike downtown. If you don't have somewhere that you're living or working, where do you keep your bike? And so I think, in a way, you can use a parking lot for many different things. I think it's also going to help with the surface parking. The number one thing I hear from my constituents who often drive into the downtown is, where do you park? I don't feel safe where I park. I'm paying too much where I park. And I think this will really help in that area, because I hear it over and over again. And often the downtown is losing people to the malls that have parking. People love to park in their car and be able to walk to the mall and not pay for their parking. And so if we can start to do something that will compete with the surface parking that is pretty high in price, I think that's going to be a good thing. The other thing, of course, is development, where people are saying, well, I have to have this surface parking lot to service and provide parking spaces to the units that I'm leasing, the commercial units I'm leasing. And this will take that argument away a little bit if there's parking provided through this. So I don't think it should be one form of transit against another. I mean, I think people are going to continue to drive cars. They're going to take public transit. Hopefully they're going to ride their bikes more. But if we can provide a little for everyone, I think that's a positive way to go. So thank you for the report, and I look forward to this moving forward.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd echo my colleagues' comments. I'm interested, though, I've read through this a few times, and I'm trying to get a better sense of what multi-use means in this circumstance. Is that commercial parking, like commercial parking, residential, commercial parking, more commercial? That didn't quite come through. It doesn't sound like if the RFQ would be for a quick turnaround, that doesn't seem to lend too well to a larger residential development.
Ms. Kanier?
Sorry, so through you, Madam Chair. So we're leaving it open at this point in the RF qual. I believe it's our intention to sort of leave it open and see sort of where the market wants to take it, because mixed use could be, you could have retail at grade, you could have office above, you could have retail at grade, you could have residential above. We're looking for a large scale development, so we're looking to make sure it includes that public parking component, but then whatever else is included, we're sort of interested to, the approach we're looking at is we're interested to see what comes out.
And Madam Chair, just in terms of the timing, I think that what we're very interested in is somebody taking it up and starting construction in short order. If it takes some time to actually build a tower, for example, that's not a problem. What we're trying to avoid is somebody sitting on it.
Understood, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, with section 4.2 in the implementation, it speaks to any zoning bylaw amendments. I think this is downtown area 2 zoned, which I'm not sure what it doesn't allow for. What would be contemplated that may actually require a zoning amendment?
So through you, Madam Chair, we'd like to make sure that what gets built reflects what is submitted. So it might be that we end up with something that's a little bit more refined, but it's that idea that we don't want someone to sort of be the successful proponent and then build something that is different than what has been identified through the process. So, right. Oh yeah, and the height and the density. I believe there is a density cap and there is a height cap. So those are things that we'd have to, if there were differences, we'd have to identify those through the zoning process too.
Okay, that makes sense. Then you're basically looking to lock it in through bonusing, through the height and density components, if that's the opportunity, and then you'd be able to identify clearly what the form was in the outset. Okay, thank you. Well, I look forward. Oh, third question. Why is this coming to us? This is a city-owned parcel of land that we're looking to develop potentially. Seems more of a corporate services, a realty issue more than a planning issue. So I'm surprised it's on our doorstep here.
Is that a comment or a question? Mr. Fleming.
Well, Madam Chair, it's a good question. I think one that the clerk can answer better than I can, but it wraps in a lot of planning considerations relating to downtown, relating to the downtown strategy. You'll actually find this as one of the items in the downtown action plan. So there's probably a number of different committees it could have gone to. But this is a heads up more than anything else, so that council doesn't see this out there in the market and then says, why is this happening? It's the best I think I can do.
Okay, thanks.
Deputy Mayor Halver.
Thank you. Just briefly, in this particular stretch of Queens Ave, we have something like 6 or 7 surface parking lots and 2.5 blocks. And so I'd like to see all those surface lots develop into buildings that are more useful. They should obviously include parking either underground or inside the building. I think that's the way we want the parking to be in the future, not on-street parking and surface parking that is sort of the least useful use of land you can imagine downtown, right? So we need to have much better use of the land downtown. And this particular segment, it's got a lot of gaps in the street. I think it's one of the reasons why it feels like if you're driving through, there's not much to look at when you're going through this particular section of Queens, other than the beautiful church on the north side. So, I think this kind of redevelopment is what we want to see private sector proponents coming forward with on all kinds of surface lots. It makes perfect sense to me as the owner of a municipal parking lot that's 75 parking spaces. It's not a great use of land downtown. It's right in the middle of the downtown, and I think the sooner we can get it redeveloped into a great mixed-use building that includes some parking, the better. I do want to say, I see the note at the bottom, this is, financial impact to come in the multi-year budget, and that wasn't lost on me. One thing that we know about structured parking, underground parking, is not cheap. And so I'll be interested to see how that shakes out in terms of the actual financing, how that's going to be paid for. And certainly we want parking to pay for parking, and I'm not interested in a big hit to the tax levy, for example, for substituting 75 parking spots into more expensive parking, right? The parking lot itself needs to pay for itself over time. So I just want to pass that comment on. I look forward to seeing the proposals that come forward.
And Madam Chair, I'll just say that part of what we're hoping here is that the value of the land to a developer being able to build a tower, I think there's good potential for there not to be a cost to the city. So we'll see how it all shakes out. That's why we're going to the market, and we'll go from there.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question through you to staff. When we do the DC charges rebate or exemption, that's just for residential development, is that correct? So if they chose to, the proponent chooses to build only commercial or retail, would they have any relief on DC charges?
Hi, through you, Madam Chair. So the DC incentive is actually a tax grant, so it comes back after taxes have started being paid, and it is only for residential. So if somebody chose to develop, like you said, only retail, they wouldn't be able to access that one.
So another question. I know I had read recently in, I think, the city of Montreal, that they had started to tax their downtown surface parking lots at highest and best use. So if they had a lot like this one on Queens and the zoning would allow so many stories, and that would translate into so much in property taxes, that's how they were beginning to tax surface parking lots in order to give incentive for landowners to actually develop those properties rather than sit on them as they earn substantial revenue through the parking lot. What is this is excellent, and I will make comments on this report itself, but I'm wondering what tools in Ontario do we have anything remotely similar to what they can do over there?
Well, Madam Chair, normally for that kind of question, I would turn to Mr. Yeoman, and he just looked at me and said, no, not me. This is one that is best directed to finance. I think that some of those financial tools can be very effective, and they can also sometimes generate unanticipated consequences. So you need to really understand what you're doing. So that's something that through the Downtown Action Plan that we're preparing now, I'll endeavor to take a look at and at least understand what's possible, so that when we have the council conversation or committee conversation, I'll be able to answer that.
I look forward to that conversation because when we have a piece of land like this one that's municipally owned, it gives us an opportunity to do something with it, to actually show leadership. So I'm really happy to see this going forward. This is the most valuable land in the city, the land that we have downtown, and it just seems to be wasted on 75 parking spots. So, and when it comes to climate change, I think, a blank canvas of asphalt is one of the worst things for climate. It actually makes the temperature hotter in the city. So I think this is a really positive change, and I'm glad to hear, through you, Madam Chair, I'm glad to hear Mr. Fleming say, what some of the next steps are for downtown, because I think a lot has been accomplished downtown. I remember how downtown was when I went to university a few years ago. We didn't tend to go past Richmond Row, and back in that era, Richmond Row wasn't considered part of downtown. So we sort of stuck you know, around the Richmond, Oxford, Richmond, around Victoria Park area, because downtown wasn't a nice place to go. And I know some people still think that that's the case, but after working downtown for the last 4 years, I've seen all of the positive changes that have taken place, and I know that that there is more to come, and it's heartening to hear the city planner talk about keeping up that momentum and keeping it going. I'm also very pleased to see that the RFQ will include demonstrated previous experience with successful completion of past projects, and also the incentives to develop and the penalties for not developing on a relatively quick timeline. I think all of those things are positive. I think we will be requiring demonstration that somebody's going to really take this seriously and move forward with something that's going to be really great for the downtown. And the fact that our current DC incentive program encourages residential development, I think that also will help to make this again, the best development that it can possibly be. Through you, Madam Chair, I want to thank staff for the report. I want to thank staff for moving forward with this. We also often hear, oh, the city owns surface parking lots, so you're being hypocritical when you're trying to eliminate surface parking lots. I think you're showing the commitment to do what's right for downtown, and what's good for downtown is really good for everybody in the City of London. Thanks.
And I want to thank everyone here, Councillor Calbaga, for starting the conversation, and great comments from the committee. I'm very supportive of this recommendation. I understand the need for that flexibility as we go through the procurement process and the RFQ to see what kind of development is going to happen here, and at the same time making sure that we have timelines set for the approvals and for construction as well, which I think is really important, that if we're going to do this, we need to know that it's going to be shovels in the ground and ready to go. So with that, I'd like to ask for a motion. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving on to 2.6, which is the Masonville Transit Village Secondary Plan. I pulled this. I know Mr. Fleming would like to make a few comments. And with that, I'd like to go to Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is another report from Ms. Canarium, and she's doing some really great work, some leadership pieces here. I just wanted to say that we've had some conversations with our Housing Development Corporation since this report hit the agenda. And as you can see, it's a status update. It continues to evolve. And I think they quite rightly pointed out that as we evolve, we should give a little bit higher profile to affordable housing. In some of the principles. So we've already knitted in the notion of mixed forms of housing, and that includes everything from 3 or 4 bedroom to 1 bedroom type of homes. But I think what we want to do is set the table that in this secondary plan, it's important that affordable housing is provided. As has been pointed out to us, there is a really significant population of people working in this area within the transit village that are working in service sector type of positions. And these are the types of salaries in a lot of cases that are having troubles finding housing, and particularly in the Masonville area where the market would drive a real significant price even for a single bedroom unit. I think it's important that in the secondary plan process that we understand there needs to be affordable housing as a component of the entire secondary plan. And that can be implemented through a series of different tools, incentives which were going to be bringing forward to you through the budget process. Inclusionary zoning, which we already have direction from council to pursue further and is remains in the legislation even with the changes through Bill 108 for transit villages like this, as well as through the review of planning applications in a number of ways. So it's just important that it gets on the board and sort of brought into secondary plan, and we've talked about it as a team and we all agree that's the case.
Thank you very much for that update, and I'll ask the committee for a motion or a comment. Councillor Cassidy.
I'm happy to do both, Madam Chair. So this is a really important issue in Ward 5, and I imagine in Ward 7 as well, which is just directly across Richmond Street from the mall. I just, you know, I've had a number of conversations with residents, with Mr. Fleming, Ms. Canarium, and Ms. O'Hagan, with people from Cadillac Fairview who are in the midst of the planning application process right now. I think it's important that as we move forward, that we're very clear on what we can and can't do, even with a secondary plan. I know that, and I have explained many times to residents the benefits of the secondary plan, rather than just allowing haphazard development to take place. When we have just ad hoc developments going on, we're limited in our ability to guide the development. So for example, at the fringes of this particular zone in our official plan, you can see low density residential development on the map, and in theory, a development application could come forward for a high rise that could be right next to some of these low density residential developments, and that's not something that anyone wants to see. So that is, you know, a true value in the secondary plan. But I also, I think that some people get the impression that this is that the city, through the secondary plan process, we're actually deciding planning applications that haven't even been received. That we are actually saying, a building of this size and this density will go in this spot. And so I think it's important that we're very clear when we say, this is how we would like development to take place, but we still decide on planning applications that come before us, as we are bound to do through provincial planning legislation. In many ways, I think secondary plans are aspirational documents, and again, I think they're positive overall, and I stress the positive nature of the secondary plan to people, residents that are living in the Masonville area. I know that the staff, through you, Madam Chair, have done a very good job with this report, and through you to them, thank you very much. It's very comprehensive. It covers off all of the concerns that have been raised by residents. I have to highlight one of them though, and it's traffic. Traffic. And I've actually spoken to people in roads and transportation about the issue, that this is an existing issue. And so fear in the area is that it will become exponentially worse. If we have 1,000 new dwelling units, that will mean to the residents, this is the fear, it will mean 2,000 extra cars on the road in the area. So I've asked staff to really work in a coordinated manner, not just roads and transportation, working with planning, but also with Cadillac Fairview, because right now that is the planning application that's in the process right now. It's a mall. It's probably the busiest mall in the city. I know for the company, the private company that owns the mall, it's one of the jewels in their crown. It's the one mall outside of 3 big metropolitan areas where they're actually investing and have invested hundreds of millions of dollars. So they have a vested interest in making this all work out really great. With the absence of rapid transit, I think the opportunities that we had to mitigate some of the traffic problems in the area are on hold for now. I don't think they're lost completely. We also have bonusing from a recent development in the ward, and part of the bonusing was a contribution to the transit station at the Masonville site. I think that's a positive thing, and I think if we can move forward with that money from the bonusing and do something really fabulous and at least mitigate the traffic issues that may be caused or worsened by the buses coming in and out of the site, moving around the site. I think that will be a really positive thing for the neighborhood and for the area. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of my notes here. I'm wondering, I have one quick question for you. I believe Transit Villages as part of the London Plan is one of the section that's under appeal, is that correct? Or is it in force and effect?
Through the chair, the Transit Village section is, and I'm going by memory here, but the majority of policies, I believe, are in force. There are portions under appeal. The height table, for instance, remains under appeal.
Thank you very much for that answer. That's great. So my final comments are around the pedestrian environment in the area. Because there are a lot of direct connections to the subdivisions to the east, it is an area where people walk to the mall. There's a Masonville branch of the library there, and there are direct pedestrian connections to that. People walk there. But it is so congested, and people have given me anecdotal stories about being hit by cars, being almost hit by cars. I do know of a couple of people personally that have been hit by cars. So again, that goes back to the traffic thing. If we can really work proactively to respond to the current situation and plan really well for the future to make this a really vibrant, wonderful area of the city. It is already really, really busy. If we can improve it through the process going forward, that will be a really good thing. Thanks.
Thank you. There is a motion on the floor. I am looking for a seconder. Deputy Mayor Helmer, and with that, I see no other comments from the committee, and I just want to thank staff for the update, and also to the community, a lot of engagement through the process as well, and I hope it continues.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Moving on now to the scheduled items, 3.1. I have spoken to the chair of EPAC, and we decided there wasn't really a need for a delegation. So there won't be a delegation, but I have asked staff just to give us a little bit of an update on the environmental management guidelines. As you can see in the report, this is a pretty important undertaking that we're going to be going through. And if we can just get an idea where we are with the consultant and the consultation process, right, to date, and where we're going.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the environmental management guidelines process is the process that we're undertaking to redo or review the environmental management guidelines. The first step in that is securing a consultant. We're actually doing a little bit of a different process where we're actually doing pre-consultation before we even bring the consultant on board. So we have taken a draft of essentially our engagement that we're proposing to the consultant. We've taken that out and we brought that forward for some consultation with stakeholders in advance, including the First Nations. So we've actually met with the Oneida, Chippewa, the Thames First Nation. We've met with EPAC, representatives of the Urban League, and representatives of the London development industry to comment not on the existing environmental management guidelines, that comes later, but to actually comment on our charge to the consultant. In other words, are we asking the right questions? Are we asking them to do the right things? We're just finishing that process up now. We've finished that consultation. We've made some revisions to what we will be going out to the consultant to ask them to do on our behalf as a result of that consultation. Our timing was intended to get that out this week. We're hoping to actually still make that. We're still trying to incorporate some of those changes. Then to bring the consultant on, the timing was actually for the beginning of November to have them retained so they would begin to do the work and have these new guidelines prepared before the summer of next year. We're hoping to get back to you in July of 2020 on that process. So that's where we are right now. It's been very interesting to actually go out and do the consultation on what we're asking the consultant to do in advance, but it's certainly helped. I think it's going to help in this process as we go forward.
I wish you well in the process. It's quite an interesting consultation process that we're undertaking. So any questions, comments from the committee? I see none. I guess, should I just receive the report since there's no delegation? And with that, I probably need a motion to do so. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Moving on to 3.2, this is a delegation request from the Trees and Forest Advisory Committee. Welcome.
Oh, yeah. Hi, thank you for giving me a little bit of time today. Just wanted to present a little bit about our past meeting for the 9th report from TFAC. And basically wanted to go over one of our main topics that it's the start of a discussion, but we think it's important and wanted to get you up to date on it. That basically there's been some proposed changes to at the provincial level that will impact planting activities in the City of London. So we've reached out to major planting organizations, 3 of them being the City of London, Reforest London, and the conservation authorities to understand how these may affect them and how it would affect the urban forest strategy going forward. So we had a discussion, conservation authorities from Upper Thames and Kettle Creek, and they both let us know that basically that's cast a bunch of uncertainty into their budgets, into what they're going to be able to move forward with. Their mandate is proposed to be fairly significantly cut back to just 3 main points, of which tree planting or tree care preservation actually isn't going to be on their mandate. So there hasn't been a major, I guess they're losing 0.5% of their funding within these proposals. So funding isn't a big thing because our understanding is that the municipalities that these conservation authorities act in actually make up the majority of their funding. So our reason for being here today is to basically put forward our recommendation and to emphasize the importance of it, that city continue to fund at current or higher levels to help the conservation authorities specifically keep up to you know, their levels of service. There's important programs, especially things like educational outreach, that help raise awareness for, you know, the environmental issues that are going on in our community. So tree planting is one of the biggest ones that is threatened, it sounds like. And the way that currently that's actually being threatened is nurseries, in response to this, have started planting less seedlings. So there will be a shortfall in available stock to be planted in the next few years for these organizations. And I think that we think that the city taking our recommendation would help send a signal to local area nurseries that there will be a market for their seedlings and that the trees that, you know, we have been planned to be planted will be planted. And basically, I think that's about it. We are going to take a little more or discuss further with Reforest London at our next meeting to discuss with them how they may be impacted and if they're going to have a shortfall in their budget, and they're going to present to us what they may need. So going forward, we may have a little more on this topic for you in our future reports. But for tonight, that's it. And if there's any questions, I do my best to answer them for you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Squire.
Through you, Madam Chair. So do you have any numbers as to how much the increase in the budget might be that they will be bringing to council? And the reason I ask that is because they come to council, they make their own budget submission, ask us for money, and we consider it as a council. And I don't understand how we would just say today, well, we're going to cover that increase without knowing numbers or anything like that. So that's my challenge. And I'm not sure whether I understand that you're requesting it, but you expect us to make a vote tonight that we're bound by any increase that they ask for?
I may have misrepresented my intentions tonight, and that's fine. I can clarify for you that I'm not asking for any sort of commitment this evening, but that basically want to make you aware that it is going to be important this time around when the conservation authorities do come for funding requests, and I don't believe that there's any current additional funding being asked for, but that there is, because of the changes in the provincial legislation, that they will basically be less secure in what they are able to provide to the municipalities that they operate in.
If I may, I know we have an A and a B, and we could refer the A to the budget process. I do have a question about B, since we are not, I guess it's not our purview to tell Reforest London what to do, but Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If it helps some clarity, the staff recommendation for the motion here is that clause 5.3 be amended as follows, and that part A be referred to the budget review for consideration. So it flows well. I think the staff motion here is appropriate. I think as we go forward, when the conservation authorities come to us during the budget process, it's going to be important to know what limitations they may have in their activities as a result of provincial budget funding changes. And so perhaps TFAC may wish to liaise with the Conservation Authority to have a better understanding specifically what that impact might be, and helpful for us to have a delineation of what those are, and if it has some impact on tree plantings, for example, what kind of reductions are we seeing? What's the cost associated with that? That helps us in our deliberations during the budget time. So, thank you. I'll move the receipt and this motion as well. But as I mentioned, there may be some more questions for our guest.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we will be referring A to the budgeting process and receiving B. Just to clarify that with the committee. Any further questions? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Just a couple of questions through to the delegation. Did you have a representative of the conservation authorities at your meeting when you were talking about their impact on their organization?
Yes, we did. We had one from Kettle Creek and one from Upper Thames.
Okay, you know, I'm not, this is just more of a comment, I'm not so convinced that the changes to their mandate, which are kind of uncertain at this point because the regulations have not come forward. So I understand that they have a bit of uncertainty about what that's going to really mean for them. That it's not going to cover things like tree planting. For example, flood control remains part of the core mandate, and trees do a lot to help with flooding. So, you know, I don't think that it's just totally off the table, and I wouldn't want people to sort of make that assumption. I think that's still to be worked out in the regulations, and I personally see it as an essential thing that they're doing, and I would expect there to be a very little change on that front. And I also would say to the advisory committee that a lot of these provincial changes, they require advocacy to the provincial government, right? So yes, there will be consequences to the municipality and it will affect some of the things that we do, but in your own role as individuals and in the organizations that you're a parts of, make sure that you're advocating to the provincial government because these things are not set in stone, right? When people come forward with changes, they really do need to hear from people what the implications will be. And I know that the provincial government has made changes in response to some public feedback about these things. So I wouldn't just assume that they're all set in stone and they're going ahead the way it might look at this point. Some things like this, you know, planting trees is one of the most cost-effective things you can do. And it has so many great benefits that I think the more advocacy we have focused on all levels of government about the value, the better. And I know you're our advisory committee, so you're coming to give us advice about the implications municipally, and I appreciate that. But I would say don't give up on the provincial advocacy as individuals, right? You're just advocating to the province and your MPPs about that issue.
Great advice, Deputy Mayor Helmer. And given the uncertainty that's going on, we do have a motion. So on the floor, if I can have someone move it. Oh, Councillor Turner. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving on to 3.3, which is a public participation meeting at 800, 805, and 810 Chelton Road. I see staff is here for a presentation. I need a motion to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, thank you for being ahead of me. Councillor Cassidy, seconding. Welcome, Mr. Mottram.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application from the Ironstone Building Company for properties located at 800, 805, and 810 Chelton Road for a zoning bylaw amendment. And the subject sites are addressed to Chelton Road, but they do also have significant frontage on Bradley Avenue, located in the southerly portion of the Summerside subdivision, just east of Highbury Avenue. The proposal for these blocks of land is to change the zoning to permit townhouses and back-to-back townhouse units up to 3 stories in height, and to also permit apartment buildings ranging in height from 4 to 6 stories. These properties represent vacant blocks of land within a registered plan of subdivision, and this is part of the Summerside subdivision, Phase 13, when that subdivision included the extensions of Meadowgate Boulevard and Chelton Road to connect with Bradley Avenue, as well as the westerly extension of Evans Boulevard. And the phases included significant single-family development, as well as these blocks. The area is being built out so that as you go around to look at the surrounding area to the north, there are existing townhouses and stacked townhouses immediately to the north. There's also vacant lands for future medium-density residential development, as well as there is an open space land, provincially significant wetland feature to the north and west of Chelton Road. To the south is farming. There's existing farm and cultivated fields on the south side of Bradley Avenue. These lands are within the urban growth boundary, and they're identified in the London plan for future light industrial, and that's the long-term intent for the development of lands on the south side, subject to more detailed planning and review of how those lands will be serviced in the future. The lands to the east are currently under development for residential single detached dwelling lots, as well as street townhouse dwellings are currently underway to the east of Meadowgate Boulevard. And then to the west, again, there is existing cultivated fields, a little bit of farming and open space lands. This is a blow-up then of the subject sites to be able to identify the actual properties and their blocks. So they are blocks in the subdivision plan. 805 Chelton Road is block 150, and it has an area of just over 4 hectares. 800 Chelton Road on the west side of Chelton is block 151, and it's almost 2 hectares in area. And 810 Chelton Road is referred to as block 152 with 1.3 hectares of area. The requested action through this amendment application is with respect to 805 Chelton Road, the northerly portion of that block, block 150, to change the zoning from a community shopping area, CSA 3 zone, to a residential R5, R57 zone, which would permit townhouses. On the southerly portion of 805 Chelton Road, the request is to change the zoning from a community shopping area, CSA 3 zone, to a residential R9, a special provision zone, which would permit your apartment buildings. I'll review this requested special provisions on the next slide, but I'll finish or continue on here and finish the other properties. 800 Chelton Road, that's block 151, immediately to the west of Chelton Road. The request is to change that zone from an associated shopping area commercial zone to a residential R9 special provision zone, similar to the southerly portion of block 150. As well as a portion of the northerly fringe of block 151 to rezone that to open space OS5. 810 Chelton Road, the block then further to the west and contiguous with, that's block 152, it shouldn't be 151, but it's contiguous with that block, is to change that zoning from currently it's zoned holding residential R6 and R9 zone to a residential R9 zone and a residential R5 special provision zone. A portion of the northerly inside perimeter of that block would also be a zone for open space OS5. The requested special provisions under the R57 zoning, which would, in this case, the special provisions would apply to the west portion of block 152 to permit an interior side yard depth of 2 meters minimum and to provide for a 0 meter setback adjacent to that proposed open space OS5 zoning. This portion of the block is for the R5 zoning would permit townhouses in there. And then these special provisions would apply only to that zone. The R97 zoning, which applies to the southerly portions of Block 150 and as well as Block 151, is to allow for a front yard depth of minimum 6 meters, an exterior side yard depth of 3 meters minimum, as well as the request there was for a 0 meter setback adjacent the open space zone. Also, what is before you is a request for bonusing to be implemented through the zoning bylaw to allow for additional building heights exceeding 4 stories up to 6 stories in height. This is the site concept plan that accompanied the application to illustrate the development that's proposed for 805 Chelton Road. This includes a three-story back-to-back cluster townhouses on the northerly portion of the site for a total of 88 units. On the southerly portion of the site, 4 apartment buildings, 2 4-story and 2 5-story buildings. All of the buildings are oriented to Bradley Avenue on that southerly portion of the site, and there would be a total of 200 units total. The application was also accompanied by a set of urban design guidelines I refer to as the Chelton Road Master Plan, and they're included, attached to the report. And the principles and of the guidelines was to ensure that the lower density, lower height housing would be on the northerly portion, gradually increasing as you move south and to more dense and higher buildings. And so you can see there's buildings quite close to Bradley Avenue. And we also have street orientation to the Meadowgate Boulevard and to Chelton Road with the back townhouses facing with their front entrances out to the public right of way and individual pedestrian access to each unit. There's vehicular access is provided at 2 points, one from Meadowgate Boulevard and another again from Chelton Road. The other feature that's provided here that was again recommended as part of the master plan guidelines was the center corridor open space amenity area, which includes a multi-use pathway that goes through the site with connections through from Bradley Avenue and then connecting over to Chelton Road. At that point, there's connections to public sidewalks as well as to park pathway blocks on the other side of Chelton Road. This is the site concept plan for the other side of Chelton Road for blocks 151 and 152. Here we have five apartment buildings, 1 4-story, 2 5-story, and 2 6-story buildings, oriented to Bradley Avenue on the southerly portion of the site for a total of 255 units. There's also shown on the concept plan a cluster of townhouses on the westerly portion of the site, and there's a total of 12 units there. Now, the zoning and the special provisions for the reduced interior side yard would apply to those 12 townhouse units, recognizing that lands immediately to the west are vacant. They're basically open space lands now currently used for agricultural purposes. On the westerly part of the 2 rows of townhouses, on the east part, that side is adjacent to the common amenity areas of the residential complex. The request for a 0-yard setback for those townhouse units is requested to be able to butt up right against that open space zoning. And that OS 5 zone is shown, and that would be applied to the additional buffer lands for the adjacent open space and provincially significant wetland. This site has gone through a couple of consultations with staff for this site planning, and one of the concerns was with the making sure that the alignment of the driveway access on Chelton Road matched with the with the development on the east side of Chelton Road. So there was some refinements, some revisions, some shifting around of buildings, and that's how we got to the result that you're seeing here, with all of the apartment buildings shifted towards Bradley Avenue. The master plan guidelines do show buildings in other locations, but this is the most up-to-date plan here now. So those guidelines, the principles still apply. We want to have the 6-story buildings at each end of that row. So that's identified as the first building at the corner of Chelton and Bradley Avenue, Building A, then B, C, D, and E. Building A and E will be 6 stories, so that you'll have some variation in the profile of the height of the buildings. Then they decrease down to 5-story, and then 4-story in the center. This also maintains the principle of maintaining the mass of the apartment buildings, both on the northwest and the northeast corner of Chelton Road and Bradley Avenue to be where the bulk of the mass, where the highest buildings are. This is some conceptual architectural renderings of the townhouses and the back-to-back townhouse units. The applicants have also provided renderings of their proposed apartment complex. So this would be examples of the 5-story and the 6-story buildings. Again, the buildings are one of the elements that the master plan guidelines address for providing for variation in terms of building materials and colors, different window sizes, ensuring pedestrian access to the building from the street, and basically variations in the vertical and the horizontal lines in order to help break up that mass and that street, where we're trying to achieve a street wall, but we don't want so much uniformity there that it doesn't provide for a blend in with the streetscape and create a rhythm along the streetscape. These are examples also that you might have seen on other applications that Ironstone and their partner Drewel are building in other parts of the city. The official plan and the London plan place type for Block 150 identifies that block as being within the shopping area place type. Now that does permit commercial, retail services, a range of uses, offices, educational, recreational, institutional uses, but it also does allow for residential development and residential uses under that, under that place type. Block 151 on the west side of Chelton is within the neighborhoods place type, and a portion of the northerly portion of that block is within the green space place type, and also Block 152 is the same. Now, Block 152 was identified in the London plan as within the high-density residential overlay. It's a carryover from the 1989 official plan. And the official plan designations from that 1989 document indicate Block 150 as a community commercial node. And again, that's for primarily a commercial use, like a community shopping center. But the policies also do permit multifamily high-density residential, as well as community facilities subject to application for zoning bylaw amendment and application for site plan approval. Block 151 is also identified within a community commercial node and a portion where the open space overlaps the southerly limit of the block. And Block 152 is designated as multifamily high-density residential. And again, a portion of that within open space. notices and response from the public engagement. We had one reply, one written reply, and with concerns relating to that there is no shopping or restaurants or services in the immediate area, and therefore the commercial zoning that's there now should be maintained, and also concerns about increase in traffic volumes on an already congested two-lane Bradley Avenue. With respect to maintaining commercial zoning, there is commercial development, a lot of vacant commercial floor space and vacant commercially zoned lands that exist further to the north at the southeast quadrant of Commissioners Road East and Highbury Avenue, which is zoned for community shopping area, CSA 5. There are also food stores, drug stores, banks, and restaurants and other services located further to the west along Commissioners Road East and west of Highbury Avenue. A lot more development activity is occurring in the Summerside area through undeveloped phases, and as well as on the east side of Jackson Road that will be coming, and it will help to build up the population base and generate demand and attract more local stores and services to the area. We have had discussions with Trullo Holdings about this issue, and they have indicated too that there is no interest in developing commercials on these sites. However, the shopping area place type will remain. It does not eliminate opportunities for commercial uses should demand shift in the future.
And
With
Mr.
respect to the,
Bertram, are we coming to an end? I know we've got a certain amount of time here, but just to let you know.
Thank you. Just then, very briefly, with respect to the increased traffic, there were no concerns expressed from the city's transportation planning. There will be improvements to the streets here for turning movements both off Bradley Avenue as well as right and left turn lanes at the Bradley Avenue, Chelton Road, and Meadowgate Boulevard intersections. The bonusing that's being requested here to allow for an increase in height above the 4 stories to the 5-story and the 6 stories is based on enhanced building and design features to be incorporated into the site plan, including an active street edge along Bradley Avenue and Chelton Road and Meadowgate Boulevard, and that these principles will be articulated in the Chelton Road Master Plan, as well as dedication of the public open space lands. The lands that will be proposed to be zoned open space are to be dedicated to the city as publicly owned land. There are other planning merits here and public benefits that have been asked to be considered, and they include enhancements to the natural heritage system, including creating a substantial buffer and native vegetation to protect the adjacent natural features. That will be reviewed in more detail as part of the site plan approval process. Adding additional secure bicycle and cycling infrastructure, more bicycle parking and storage, and the multi-use pathway through the site, which I had already mentioned, and tree planting as well along the frontages and within the common amenity areas. So our recommendation there for, Madam Chair, is for approval on the north half of Block 150 to the R57 zone to permit the back-to-back townhouse dwellings. The south half to permit the apartments under the residential R9 special provision zone. We are recommending here that there be a minimum building setback of 3 meters, as well as a maximum 6 meter setback for those buildings to ensure that you have that close proximity to the public streets. The height of that zone is 4 stories, but there will be provision for bonusing to increase the height on that block to 5 stories, identified as Building A and Building D. Block 152, the same R97 zoning would be applied to those with the same special provisions, except that that will be able to increase to 6 stories for 2 buildings, Buildings A and Building Z, and then 5 5 stories for the other 2 buildings, as well as to apply the open space zone to the buffer. And then with respect to Block 152, the R57 special provision would apply there. We won't be recommending a 0 meter setback from the open space. We are recognize there is a pinch point there, and that to provide some flexibility, they're going to have to make some adjustments to those townhouses, and will allow for a 3 meter minimum setback there. So our recommendation is it is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with the enforced policies of the London Plan, and the use, form, and intensity of this development conforms with the enforced policies of the official plan. I think that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Any technical questions from the committee? Councillor Turner.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mottram. Through you, Madam Chair. Reading through the report gives a good picture of this. The part that it doesn't really expand on much is the natural heritage feature that it's adjacent to. If I read through the recommendation, it seems to recommend that that buffer that's incorporated as OS5 is as a result of the bonusing. So it was a bit of it wasn't anticipated in the original zone. It was added to that. There's a comment from Upper Thames and a comment from the ecologist that talk about the use of the pathway through there. The ecologist says we've got to try and get that as close as possible out of the pathway. Upper Thames says it can't be in the pathway, in the buffer. But I'd imagine that's something that gets reconciled a little bit further through this stage. But would you be able to say what the width of that buffer is?
I think that the width is around 20 meters, 25 meters approximately.
I've got a technical question just following up on the provincially significant wetland to the north, and in particular, you had a slide 805 or 800 and 810. You said there was a number of changes to that plan. The shifting of those buildings now are closer to Bradley, but the parking is behind, and then we've got the buffering and then the wetland. I'm just wondering any concerns around the snow removal, the salt, and concerns of that going into that natural heritage feature.
Yes, that plan does show 9 parking spaces that encroach into the buffer. They have to come out of the buffer. So that will be a revision that we'll be looking at as part of the site plan that comes in. The other thing is what we want to be concerned about here is the salt-laden snow melt. That concept plan does show snow storage all the way along the outer rim of the parking area, but adjacent to the buffer. And we want, before the EIS, the scoped EIS is finalized, that those concerns are addressed, that there is a proper way of managing snow melt that is, and that it's all drained internally to the site and not to the PSW. Absolutely.
Good to know that. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm just going to ask the question now. I'm not necessarily expecting staff to have the answer right away, but I think it's going to come up based on the questions around traffic. For these 2 large parcels, 800 and 805, that are currently zoned for shopping uses, do you have a sense of what the trip generation rates would be for those now? Because I would expect it to be pretty high compared to what the residential expected trips would be with the proposed zoning. So.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yep.
So yes, if it was a commercial site, it would have been higher. I don't have the number right now, but this site, the way it is now, as per the rezoning, will generate around 250 to 300 trips during the peak hour. Normally, the commercial would be 1.5 or 2 times as much based on the footage.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the applicant now, if the applicant's here. Please come forward, your name, address, and you do have 5 minutes.
Through the chair, on behalf of the applicant, Carrie O'Brien, we'd just like to thank staff for their work on working with this report, and we are supportive of the report and available for questions if there's questions from members.
Any technical questions of the applicant? I see none, so therefore I'll go to the gallery, and I'll start here on my left, and if there's anyone that would like to speak to this application, just come forward to the microphone, stating your name, address if you wish. And I'm on this side here, if there's anyone. I'll move over here. Anyone here that would like to speak to this application? The microphones are here, just come forward. I see none. I will ask one more time. And see no one, I am looking to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Any questions, comments from the committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a comment there right at the end of the answer to one of the questions that identified that there was a provincially significant wetland in that ESA, in the OS 5. So I was just madly trying to pull up our boundary guidelines, our buffer guidelines for PSWs. So 20 meters did surprise me because that's actually fairly generous, as we usually talk about 10s. So then I guess that made sense. But what is our buffer distance? I guess the trigger distance on a PSW for an EIS is 200 meters, isn't it? I think that the trigger distance on the EIS, not the buffer, so I wasn't sure what our requirement was in that, and if that was something that hadn't been scoped in the original zoning in this site.
20 meters, I'd have to actually scale it off to determine what it shows, what the buffer width is.
Perhaps I might be able to zone the question in a little bit. From the edge of property line, where it's being identified, to where the actual edge of the PSW is, what's that distance? That plays in a little bit when we're talking about snow storage and sequestration of stormwater on that site.
I don't have a figure for that. I think that the actual limit is fairly close to the lot lines there. I wanted to, during the subdivision approval process, and a lot of the focus was on the north side of the PSW. This didn't get that much focus. It appeared that everything was going to be fine until this scoped EIS came in with this application and determined that no, so we've refined the buffer and you're going to need some additional buffer. So that was essentially what we discovered through this application. It does correct the situation, providing for additional buffer, and recognizes in a more detailed manner where that feature limit is.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I'd read through this, and I'm not sure if was there a section that addressed the ecological component of this application, or did it really focus just on the site, kind of conceptual site planning and built form components?
The EIS was scoped to the site, yes.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was much discussion in the report itself. As I read through it, I hadn't identified it, but then as I was trying to figure out why the buffer was there, and I was piecing it together, I wasn't sure if there was a component that really examined the findings of the EIS. There's a small component from the Upper Thames and a small component from the ecologist, but it doesn't really explore that site's relation to the adjacent natural heritage feature.
Right, and not in the report. The EIS that did come through was reviewed. It was sent off to the Conservation Authority, and it was reviewed by Upper Thames, as well as by the city's ecologist too. So the comments that I have that are provided in the report are our basis for proceeding with the zoning recommendation.
Just following, if the committee will allow me, just following up on Councillor Turner's questions, is it required, just a question to you, Mr. Mottram, about a holding provision for the EIS for the approval of this zoning? Is that required, given?
No, I do not believe so. No.
Any other comments, questions from the committee? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to staff. You mentioned that on the west side, I believe, of one of the blocks, that it's zoned agricultural. Is it actually currently being used for agricultural purposes?
There is some agricultural there. There are also residential dwellings that would have been at a time more of in a rural setting, and they're in a currently an urban reserve zone, UR1 zoning. So that zoning recognizes the existing uses and the existing dwellings.
So what we've had in the past is when there are agricultural uses going on and then we allow the development to sort of encroach on those areas, then we have that conflict. I'm wondering if you foresee any future problems with those kinds of rural urban conflicts that we've had here at this committee in the past.
Through you, Madam Chair. In this particular instance, no, there will be no conflicts. The lands that Mr. Mottram is referring to the west are all within the urban growth boundary. They're zoned urban reserve use. They do permit existing agricultural operations, so there's no conflict from a compatibility perspective.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? I am looking for a motion. Councillor Turner.
With respect to comments, I think this represents good built form. I like the mix of densities. The area is predominantly R1 zoned and developed at R1. There is some exception with some towns and that and the like, but this helps to I guess kind of recover a bit of a subdivision that was done over kind of old policies in the way that it was done there. I do recognize some of the residential concerns with respect to that desire for commercial space. I would look a little bit to the north, though, and look at the struggle that the commercial plaza along Commissioners has, and wonder about the commercial viability of a commercial plaza not so far away, and with fairly limited traffic to feed that in terms of who would actually. But I could see a need for commercial convenience in this area. Because it's at the extreme end of the other end of the subdivision. So it's good to hear that it still retains that overlay. Having the high density overlay in here and developing at 6 stories is actually, I think, a great outcome. I think it finds that mid-rise rather than necessarily a high-rise in this circumstance. It's well suited, and so I'm happy to see that. I'm happy to see an incorporation of buffers. I would like to see more information in reports that explores that a little bit more, because I look at the I've got the map, the aerial map on it right now, and I can't see the delineation of the wetland component itself. The wetland needs a 30-meter buffer as a wetland itself at a minimum, and then it talks about a 3-to-1 ratio getting into further between ground coverage and the size of that. The ratio of 3-to-1 of upland to wetland habitat area for protection of smaller wetlands, which this may qualify as. So in all of that, I recognize Upper Thames has taken a look at it and the ecologists has looked at it, and this is where we've come to. So I will take the word for that, but it's helpful to have that information as we're looking through that, because it was a big question mark as I was reading through this to say, how does this all interact with each other? But with those noted corrections, especially the idea of bringing the path out of the buffer zone, and what's being proposed here, I'm prepared to support the recommendation as put forward to us.
I will take that as a motion. Sure. I'm looking for a seconder. Deputy Mayor Helmer, any other comments from the committee? I see none. I'd just like to make a quick comment about supporting this application. I think Councillor Turner said it well. It's that missing middle. It's good to see this kind of development coming in with the mixed uses. Concerns about that buffering, but I too will sort of, you know, take the requests from coming out of Upper Thames and but hoping we're going to still follow that buffering process through with the parking and how we're going to manage all that water is something that I just would like to emphasize. So with that, if we can vote on this motion.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving on to the 3.3, which is a public participation, 3.4, a public participation meeting on 1339, 1347 Commissioners Road West. I am going to ask the Vice Chair, Councillor Cassidy, to take on the role of the chair, as this is an application in my ward that I'd like to speak to.
So I will look for a motion to open the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you, Mr. Dever. So first we will hear from staff, because I see we have quite a few people in the gallery. So go ahead with the staff presentation.
The subject site is currently a location of 3 existing single detached dwellings fronting on a civic boulevard. The site is located near the Byron commercial area and across the street from St. Anne's Anglican Church and the Byron Northview Public School. To the west of the property is a relatively new 5-story apartment building, and to the east and north is a single-story townhouse condominium complex at 1337 Commissioners Road West. The purpose and effect of the recommended amendment will allow for a 5-story, 34-unit apartment building with underground parking and a density of 132 units per hectare. We are also recommending bonusing for additional height and density in return for a high-quality built form, affordable housing, and to a lesser extent, underground parking and enhanced landscaped open space. The original site concept that was submitted with the application shows the building located close to the property line, and I will just point out that the left side of the screen is south, the right side of the screen is north. I think I said that right. Shows the building located close to the front property line after road widening is taken, with landscaping areas in the city boulevard and along the west side, 2 surface parking spaces, and the ramp to the underground parking situated immediately adjacent to the north property line. Through discussions with the applicant and in response to concerns raised by the neighbors, particularly in the townhouse complex, the revised site concept has quite a few changes. First of all, the building has been shifted to the west to create a larger 6.8 meter east side yard to allow for additional opportunities for landscaping in that area. The result of that change is a reduction to 2.2 meters on the west side yard adjacent to the existing apartment building. The width of the ramp was decreased to that necessary for the movement of vehicles, as opposed to the broader width that was proposed in the original site concept, resulting in an increased area for landscaping behind the parking ramp. one additional surface parking spot was created, and the height was increased by 1 meter to accommodate service vehicles and moving trucks under the cantilever of the building. So the ingress to the property is here. The egress from the property actually goes underneath the east end of the building through that location. Policy context. The 1989 official plan allows low-rise apartment buildings to a maximum of 75 units per hectare, with possible bonusing to a maximum of 100 units per hectare, where 132 units per hectare have been requested. The plan also permits heights above 4 stories if considered appropriate through a compatibility study. The recommended development conforms with respect to height, and an amendment to the 89 plan is under consideration to align with the policies of the London Plan with respect to density. The London Plan allows low-rise apartment buildings a minimum height of 2 stories, a maximum height of 4 stories, and possible bonusing up to 6 stories. Intensity, while not determined specifically numerically, must be appropriate for the size of the lot. The requested 5-story building with 132 units per hectare conforms to the neighborhood's place type, which I will note is among the policies that are not in force in the London Plan. With respect to zoning, we have considered the R8-4 zone as an appropriate base zone, and special provisions to that zone are limited to a minimum front yard depth of 2 meters, which is in line with our urban design goals, a minimum interior west side yard of 2.2 meters, and a maximum height of 17.5 meters. And again, that height is in response to the ability to fully utilize that driveway underneath the cantilever in the building. With respect to bonus provisions, the main reasons for bonusing for this application are design and affordable housing. With respect to design, the building is situated close to the street, providing a continuous street wall and active ground floor uses with windows and principal entrances facing the street to create an active street edge. In addition, the parking is located underground away from the street frontage, and in combination with additional landscaped open space area and treatments that exceed the minimum city standards are eligible for bonusing. With respect to affordable housing, the applicant is prepared to provide 3 affordable 2-bedroom units, 2 of those units which are to be accessible and located on the ground floor. Rents are not to exceed 85% of the CMHC average market rent, and the affordability period will be 15 years. Just with respect to some of the specific concerns that were raised by members of the public, a big one was traffic. We did reach out to the Transportation Division for a very specific response with regard to that concern. Commissioners Road has an average annual daily traffic volume of 16,500 vehicles, and there is capacity to support additional traffic generated by the development. The anticipated traffic generated is usually measured by the peak periods, so we're expecting an additional 7 vehicles in the morning peak period and 2 additional vehicles in the PM peak period. The area is well served by public transit, cycling, and pedestrian facilities, including a new crosswalk recently installed just west of the site, which provides very good access to the public uses on the south side of the street. Accident rates are below other similar roads in the city, with 10 collisions in the past 5 years. And the building shift I described earlier will provide greater separation between the existing and new driveways, which will be dealt with in more detail at the site plan stage. One of the other major concerns was parking. The revised plan does include 3 dedicated surface parking spaces, one of which is accessible. The lay-by under the building cantilever can also accommodate temporary parking and larger vehicles for resident drop-off, moving trucks, and delivery vehicles. In addition, the site plan standards that will be applied at the site plan stage would normally support 3 to 4 visitor parking spaces for a 34-unit development. Scale, setbacks, and privacy. Units to the east are front-facing to the proposed development and separated by the front amenity area, individual driveways, and the private access drives to both developments. The increased east side yard, the generous rear yard depth, and proposed plantings along the perimeter of the property will help to mitigate the impact of the height of the building. I would point out that the yard depths adjacent to 1337 Commissioners Road West with the amendment to the site concept exceed the minimum required by the R84 zone. And the exposure from windows and balconies is reduced to the east by the building design and to the north by the generous rear yard depth. At the site plan stage, we have pointed out, it would be part of the council resolution if approved, that the site plan staff be notified to have a look at photometric analysis to manage lighting impacts, to require a noise study to evaluate and mitigate noise impacts from the parking ramp and the underground parking, and to review the possibility of enhanced boundary landscaping along the east and north property lines that exceed the site plan control bylaw and have screening and privacy qualities. Pardon me. So our recommendation for the official plan amendment is to amend the 1989 official plan by adding a policy for specific residential areas to permit density bonusing up to 132 units per hectare in return for a site design that mitigates the impacts of development and provides affordable housing, enhanced landscaped open space, and underground parking. The recommended amendments are consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform to the in-force policies of the 1989 plan and the London plan, are in a location that is appropriate for residential intensification, and permit an intensity that is appropriate for the site and surrounding area. Now, with respect to zoning, we are recommending amendment from a combined residential R1, residential R5 zone to a residential R8 for bonus zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deppert. Is the applicant here? Do you wish to comment?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Harry Frusios. I'm with Selenka Priamo Limited, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Milan Starcevic, to discuss tonight's application. I won't have much to say. I'm probably going to reiterate much of what was said by staff. And I do want to thank staff for their efforts in working with our client to bring this recommendation forward this evening. I also want to thank the neighbors who came to the public open house on June 26 and provided their comments. As you heard, approval of this application will facilitate the construction of a 5-story building containing 34 units within an area that's surrounded by both low, medium density residential as well as institutional and commercial uses. Subsequent to the open house where we heard some comments, we did make revisions which Ms. Deppert went through. We moved the building closer to the existing 5-story building to the west to open up that east and north side of the property to allow for more opportunities for landscaping and buffering, which we believe will address the comments principally that were provided by the neighboring residents. And as you heard, the proposed development will be bonused for affordable housing as well as exceptional design. The only thing I wanted to add was that the initial request from HDC was to provide 2 two-bedroom units and 1 one-bedroom unit, and our client agreed to provide an extra bedroom to provide the 3 two-bedroom units. And I think that gesture does warrant some acknowledgement, in my opinion. And so based on that, we're in support of the staff recommendation before you this evening, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I look to committee. Any technical questions for staff or the applicant? I'm not seeing any, so I will thank you. And I will move to members of the public. If you wish to speak, just come forward to the microphone, state your name and your address if you're comfortable with that, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
My name is Brian Nuttall, a native Londoner, a Byronite and media professor at Fanshawe College in London. It's my privilege to address the committee on behalf of the Byron Woods community at 1337 Commissioners Road West, Byron, adjacent to the proposed development at 1339, 1347 Commissioners Road West. I also want to acknowledge and I appreciate the great support of our 14 community members who have joined me here in the gallery. We wish to express at the outset that we are not opposed to development on this property. We appreciate the opportunity to identify four areas of concern prepared with our understanding of the 1989 official plan, the London Plan, and zoning bylaws. 1, the scale of the proposed development, a 5-story structure, traffic safety, tree preservation in the environment, and privacy will be addressed. I'll begin with the building size or scale and quote from the application details in the public meeting notice. It reads, "Normally, height limitations will not exceed 4 stories, and density will generally not exceed 75 units per hectare, with provision for up to 100 units per hectare with bonusing." So upon careful review of the design, we support the official plan that the proposed building is too large for this small parcel of land. Point number 2, traffic safety. The proposed apartment building's entry and exit point is immediately adjacent to or parallel to the entry point to the Byron Woods community with minimal separation. A left turn lane on Commissioners Road is already in place for Byron Woods residents. The position of the proposed building's entrance and exit parallel to and dangerously close to the Byron Woods driveway will create a traffic hazard. It could become a dangerous game of who goes first. The position of the building's entrance also extends to issues surrounding the turning radius for larger vehicles due to the reduction in width of the underground parking lanes on the site. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the residents of Byron, particularly along Commissioners Road West, and those with children attending Byron Northview School, appreciate your recent approval of the newly installed signal crossing near Stephen Street. Thank you. The City of London official plan includes the following: to encourage infill residential development in residential areas where existing land uses are not adversely affected. Again, where existing land uses are not adversely affected. This speaks to our third area of concern, trees and the environment. London City Council's strategic policy states, and I quote, "A cohesive landscape design should demonstrate how existing trees are protected and proposed landscape design integrates this project into its context with the community and adjacent natural environment essential for our prosperity." At this location, there are many mature trees, some I call big old London trees, that stand 40 feet and higher. Given the plans for the underground parking, these trees will be eliminated. How many trees will we lose here? The proposed design does not include plans to replace these mature trees, and in all likelihood, it wouldn't be possible. We understand the benefits of trees for their beauty and natural sound absorption, sanctuaries for birds and other natural wildlife, shade, air quality, privacy, which I will expand on shortly. The current design plan for this apartment building is not only contrary to our city's initiatives vis-a-vis retaining our natural gems, but verbiage in the Thames Valley Corridor Plan with recommendations that more emphasis is needed to protect our natural heritage rather than allowing infrastructure, residential encroachment, lack of stewardship, and fragmentation to occur. This morphs nicely into the fourth area of concern, privacy. The development of a 5-story apartment building will overlook 17 units of 1-story condominium townhomes. The condominium residents' open view will be a very large building. The current screen of tall trees discussed earlier will be gone. Only a wooden fence will then separate the two properties. There really is an essential need for natural, tall buffering to minimize noise and lighting spillover due to the proposed underground entry point on the other side of the fence, and to maximize privacy for those in the condominiums directly to the north and east of this proposed building. There has to be a fair balance with the quality of life for those affected by a wholesale change to their home's outlook and surroundings, and your mandate to create infill residences, residential or otherwise, and affordable housing.
You have about 10 seconds left, sir.
We salute the city planners who have taken like comments under advisement, and to recap, 4 areas of concern, the scale of the proposed building, traffic safety, trees in the environment, and privacy. We appreciate your time on this matter. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Anybody else looking to speak to this application? So no, that's it. So your representative spoke for all of you. Very, very good. So I just want to make absolutely sure nobody else wants to speak. And I will look to committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Comments, questions, committee? I'll go to Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, I have a quick question, just following up on the presentation, and thank you very much for the community for coming out and for the presentation. Just following up on the 4 points, the second one being about the safety, the entrance to in and out of the driveway. So we're going to have 2 driveways that are going to be parallel to one another and moving in and out in both directions. So in other words, there's 4 directions going on into and onto Commissioners and then into the both developments. And with the church across the street with an entrance in that vicinity, I just want to make sure that staff have sort of looked at, regardless of what gets developed there, moving in and out of these 2 complexes that almost share a driveway. Is that a concern? Was it looked into?
Through you, Madam Chair. Currently the site has 3 driveways to the 3 lots over there, and normally the less driveways you have into an arterial, that means it's less conflict. I know the distance is very close to the existing access to the site 1337, but they are separate. This is common. We have many like this in the city. It's not recommended. But in this case, it's either the access will be close to the site to the right or to the other adjacent property to the left. Otherwise, it could be in the middle. In this case, it might be not feasible to do that. So from a safety perspective, transportation does not see this a huge safety. There is a 2-way left-hand lane on Commissioners, and it should work, function probably.
If I may, just following up on that as well, there's a driveway to the church that is almost directly across from this development as well, which is, this is a very busy area, busy road, and a lot of people do park in the church parking lot, not only going to the church, but also to the school. That's sort of the main parking lot for this area. So there's a lot of activity in this little area. Yeah, I just want you to comment on the parking across the street and the entrances that would, I assume, use that same lane, that left right-hand turn lane, I would think.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the reason why in some streets we'll have the 2-way left-hand lanes is when driveways are close to each other, when you have more than 1 access points along a street. That's why these type of 2-way left-hand lanes are installed. The other issue here, or I would say the other benefit here is that this site will not generate a lot of traffic compared to the existing traffic. It's going to add 7 at the most during the PM peak, which is 70 trips during the entire day. So there isn't much traffic going to the new site compared to the existing traffic right now.
And just following up on that, the delineation of the trees that are going to be put in the raised planters along that east side would be enough to distinguish these two driveways. I know they can't put you can't put the trees up near the front, but would that be sufficient to define the two driveways?
If we want to follow the access management guidelines perfectly, it's a little bit less than what's required. However, with signage to both driveways, it should be sufficient.
Yes, that's my question. I can make a comment, but I'll leave it up to the committee.
Why don't I go to Councillor Squire, and you can definitely wrap up, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, there was some discussion by the community about loss of trees. And I just looking at the report, there's a discussion in a general way that I see about trees. Are you able to quantify how many trees are going to be removed? Is it too early to say that? Will that sort of wait till site plan because it was raised as an issue?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, tree preservation will be dealt with at the site plan stage. So we are unable to quantify the number and type of trees that are on the site at this point in time.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks. I'm just taking a look at the aerial view of this one as well. And looks like there's a mix of trees in various stages of maturity. The site plan, get the right one. The landscape plan itself identifies a fair amount of trees along that fence line on the northern edge that weren't there before. In fact, actually, it looks like there's a couple trees, about 2 or 3 trees along that are fair size along the northern fence line, but set to be replaced by at least 6 new trees in the plan itself. I was trying to just take a look for context against 1357 Commissioners Road, the neighboring building that for what we provided in terms of context, setbacks, heights, all of those things. And for that one, I think we limited at 16.5 meters. This is a request for 17.5 meters, so it's 1 meter taller, or 3 feet roughly. The depth, the front yard setback was 2 meters. In this case, it's 2 meters as well. So in terms of scale and setback and rhythm of the street, this matches pretty closely with its neighboring building. So in terms of the zone and what would be appropriate from an official plan perspective and from a zoning perspective, it's consistent with what's there. I can recognize the concerns that the community might have is that this ends up just being the consistent, as of right almost, size, depth, height that would be allowed as you went along Commissioners Road because its neighboring building was there. I think I recognize where the application is going was really to kind of match that and have a bit of a consistent front along here. Given that, I mean there almost always is a traffic concern that comes up, but it's 34 units. It's not a high volume number of building and units that would contribute to traffic challenges within the block. The trees, it's moderately planted, but it looks like the planting landscape plan almost compensates for each of those, almost on a one-to-one basis. I'm not sure for sure, but when I look at the aerial versus what's on the landscape plan, they seem to. Of course, the challenge right now is that it doesn't provide direct shelter and privacy for the condo buildings that are to the north of the site. It will take a little bit for those trees to build up into maturity to create the sheltering and So as it moves through the site plan, it might make sense to try and get the largest maturity or the largest canopy that you could with those to provide the sheltering, especially on the north side. In terms of the east and west sides of this, I don't see as much of a requirement for that because the facades are north and south on this building. And really it's a driveway to the east that we're talking about. So I think the concept as it's been put forward here makes sense to try and bring the building closer to the street, which allows more rear yard setback rather than pushing it back towards the condo itself. It matches the neighboring one, and I to me it seems consistent and appropriate along this block here. So I'd be willing to support the application. I'll still listen to the arguments of my colleagues, but as I look through it, I'm struggling to try and find something that I would not agree with in this, so that I would have to push back on in some way. The only thing is, I remember the discussion we had a few years ago on 1357, and it ended up being a game of inches on how high this thing went, and we ended up stopping at 16.5, and there was discussions about the parapets and the rooftop amenities and all of that. And this is a meter taller than that, and that was a struggle at 16.5. So I'm not sure if there's opportunities. Just be consistent with that. But I recognize what the approach and the intent was here.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, if the committee will allow me to make some comments, and I would like to make an amendment too. But I want to just start off following up on Councillor Turner's comments about how this building is more or less set in line with the previous building. I think getting back to the community and about intensification and infill, the community is used to intensification and infill. They experienced it a couple years ago with the 5-story next door, and now we have this application coming forward. And I want to specifically address the concerns of the residents at the condo complex, the back to the north of this development. And what I want to talk about is, first of all, I want to address the applicant. I appreciate the applicant's open house that he had back in the summer, allowing for the community to come in and look at the plans. And I know changes were made to push the building closer to the west, closer to the other apartment building, and the setbacks going to the front, but more important, increasing the affordable housing units to 3, I think is commendable. I think also adding that extra bit of that extra parking spot. There's now 3 as opposed to 2, a little bit more movement for turning around. You have to remember that there's underground parking here, and when you go down that ramp and coming up that ramp, there has to be some kind of space and movement for even the garage truck coming in and moving around as well, and picking up the garbage that is going to be to that northeast corner. So I appreciate some of the changes that were made, but I do want to specifically address some of the concerns from the community, and following up on the importance of that the privacy and that buffering to the north. It can't be said enough that there's not a lot of space between the condo backyards that have trees in them, that there is that border, that boundary, that create that privacy that is so important to that garage door, opening and closing and going into that ramp. There's a lot of, there's very little space there, and you really have to see it to believe it when you're there, understanding how close these condo houses are to that fence. And again, it's even addressed in this recommendation that it is problematic. The lighting will be a consideration, how that lighting is going to work. A noise study to evaluate the mitigation noise impacts relating to the parking ramp. That is still a concern there. It's in the recommendation. An enhanced provision of boundary landscaping along that north side is also a consideration. And I think I cannot emphasize enough the importance of creating that buffering and that privacy for the residents. And regardless of what happens there with this plan, and I would like to add a couple amendments. The first amendment I would like to suggest is that holding 5 provision be added to this recommendation, which is the B part, that the public be part of that site plan process, given the concerns around lighting, noise. That is very important, that they have an opportunity to address the plans moving forward. The other part I would like to add as a 4 to C3, if you look at the recommendation, and that would be to add the protection of the preservation of trees along that north boundary. Not only the trees on the applicant's side, but preserving the trees on the condominium side as well. There's a lot of trees. This is Byron. We love our trees, and there's a lot of trees that bound from along the condominium side as well. There's very little space that we're talking about between the backyard of the condo unit to the fence to this building. And it would be important that we preserve and look at how those boundary, the vegetation, except for hazardous trees, things like that, but they should be maintained to create that privacy. And I would also like to add that part 5, that whatever trees are put in there, they should be privacy trees. They shouldn't be, they should create that buffering that is important to the community. So with that, I would like to make those amendments to this recommendation. And with that, I'll leave it to the committee.
Councillor Turner.
Could I just, through you, Madam Chair, get some clarity on that second part? Because C3 states enhanced provision of boundary landscaping along the east and north property boundaries that not only exceed the standards of the site plan control bylaw, but also has screening privacy qualities. That seems to address the concerns that the councillor is raising here.
Councillor?
If I may, according to the landscape plan, the trees that are going to be on the east side are ornamental trees in planters. I don't know if that's considered enhanced. It's important that some kind of buffering would be along the east side, not only to delineate the two driveways, but there's condo units that also look at that side. So for me, the bonusing is coming from the enhanced part of the landscaping. There's very little open space, there's very little amenity space, and the border trees along the north that create a buffering right now should be maintained.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll try not to get into cross debate. I'm struggling because the landscape plan as identified here is a conceptual. It's not part of the site plan. We go to site plan from this point, and with that direction there, that it's a pretty robust direction for site plan consideration, and incorporates screening privacy qualities and exceeds the standards of the site plan control bylaw. That's a pretty heavy recommendation to bring forward to the site plan phase. So it sounds like the recommendation in that second clause that the councillor is bringing forward is rather redundant, because I think it's captured here. I'm trying to figure out what's not captured in here because it's rather descriptive.
I believe that the counselor is purposely adding the word trees as opposed to just boundary landscaping. But I don't want to speak for the counselor. It's just that it doesn't say trees in C3, and the counselor has specifically said something about the preservation of trees.
And if I may just add to that, and I know we don't want to go cross debate here, but it's also protecting the trees that are on the other side of that fence as well. The root system that already exists, the trees that are all along that boundary on the condominium side as well. It's preserving that side.
I wonder if committee would allow me to ask a few questions, and maybe the questions I ask will help, hopefully. Okay, so I want to ask about the north side setback. I'm sorry, I can't find it in here, and I don't remember what it is. So I want to know what the north side setback is, and that's number one. And number two, do we measure that from the building or from the driveway going into the parking garage?
Through Madam Chair. I have to, squint at my site plan. So the setback is measured from the building to the property line. And in the revised site concept, that setback is 19.3 meters.
And so a follow-up to that, do we know what the distance is from the proposed driveway, roadway heading into the parking garage and the lot line?
Madam Chair, sorry, my copy's kind of blurry. I think I'm reading 2.9 meters on the plan.
So another question to staff, the excavation, I'm not sure exactly at what point on the driveway it starts to descend. I imagine it would start fairly soon after rounding the corner there. What is the danger to trees, trees on the neighboring properties for this kind of roadway, driveway being built?
Without a tree preservation plan, it's difficult. The intent, obviously, with any tree preservation initiative is to ensure that trees on properties that are not being developed are not damaged. With respect to the trees on the property, it would be my preliminary expectation that most of this property would have to be excavated in order to put in the infrastructure to support the buildings and the underground parking garage.
Okay, so the enhanced landscaped open space, can you explain that? Will it actually be trees put into the ground or will they be planters?
Madam Chair, through you, Madam Chair, the raised planters have been proposed because we need to ensure that there's sufficient ground cover over top of the underground infrastructure to support a root system. So it most likely will be planters that these trees will be planted in.
And when we talk about landscaped open space, I know that includes sidewalks, so that's considered landscaped open space, even though it's not grass or anything. Does it also include the driveway? Is the driveway considered part of the landscaped open space, or is that not?
No, the landscaped open space excludes the parking area and the driveway.
Okay, and so for the affordable housing, it's in place for 15 years. What happens at the end of 15 years? If somebody is living there, does their rent automatically jump up to market rate, or would their rent stay at the affordable rate until a new tenant moves in?
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is that once the agreement is completed, then it becomes market rent at that point. I don't think it extends beyond there. Mr. Justizia is in the audience, and he might be able to clarify.
Agreement at the end would allow the unit to become market, but the tenant has security of tenure. So the rent of that tenant would then only go up by whatever the Residential Tenancy Act would allow in that year, but it would be based on their affordability. So they would retain their affordability, and it would only go up from there. It would only change once a change in tenancy occurred.
Great. And one final question. Councillor Hopkins spoke about the two driveways side by side. I understand we have that throughout the city. I do know that there are 3 existing driveways, so there's more access points on the arterial road, which we always seek to limit. However, I would say that there's probably, when it's 2 directions in and out of one driveway, there's probably more action going on there. But my concern is, or my question is about the wall supporting the cantilever. In the rendering that we were shown, it shows that that wall is flush with the front of the building, and I wonder if there are any concerns there, safety concerns, so not so much the amount of traffic and the volume of traffic, but the sight lines for both driveways, because that brick wall comes right up to the city right-of-way.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is something that we will investigate through the site plan in more detail. And yes, I don't disagree. It's something that we need to ensure that it is safe.
Thank you. So those are my questions, committee. I'm looking for, okay, Councillor Hopkins. Deputy Mayor Helmer, Councillor is letting you go first.
Just a couple of comments. I think the revised site plan is responding to a lot of the concerns that has been expressed so far. I think moving the building a bit to the west and getting some plantings in along the eastern boundary is smart. I think having some plantings along the back, considering the constraints, I think is really important. And I would expect that, I know there's not a whole lot of room on the other side for the other property owners, but if this building goes ahead, I think they're going to be planting on their side too to try and get a bit more privacy. I do want to say that I think from a density perspective, you know, if we're interested in protecting trees and natural heritage features, we need more developments like this that are only on 0.26 hectares and have 34 units, including underground parking, and fewer, frankly, like the condominium complex that is right beside it, and is much more intense than what we had in single-family houses in other neighborhoods, but is, by my count, 18 units on 0.8 hectares. So that's a lot more land to accommodate fewer units. And the one beside it is 29 units on 1.4 hectares. And, you know, there were trees and other natural features there before those developments were built. And we have to build more efficient, higher density uses if we want to protect natural features and trees in the long term in the city. And so this kind of development, yes, it will have some impacts on the existing trees. I think we have to plant to replace those things. I know it's really difficult because the existing trees provide such great features. So I think we have to be really careful about protecting the ones that can be protected, making sure that we minimize the impacts on all the adjacent properties. But in the long run, we have to see more developments like this one. And underground parking for 34 units is excellent. That's a great use of land. I did want to say briefly on the affordability thing, I think we have to be careful about what we're calling affordable housing. You know, this is what I would call this is below market housing, which is good and meets a need in the community. But I think people's expectation around affordable is that it would be deeper. And a number of members of the community have brought this up a couple of times because we're seeing more of this through bonusing, and a lot of what we're seeing through bonusing is the below market, slightly less, shorter term duration things, which I think are an improvement over what we had before, which is nothing on affordability of housing through bonusing. But I do think it's stretching the concept a bit to the point where people can't follow, you know, what exactly are we doing, and is that really affordable housing? And I think this is more properly called below market. So I'm going to support the suggestion here. I do think the site plan is really, like the zoning, I think the site plan is really where a lot of the issues are going to be resolved. And I do think a public site plan is a great idea. I think we have to make sure that the buffering is done as best as possible. And I think when it comes down to the site plan, you know, slightly smaller units may come out of it. You know, you have to squish the floor plate a little bit. I don't know, because it's really pushing the envelope. When I look at the ultimate road widening, you know, like that's a site plan I'm looking at. That's really squeezed on there. So I think it's going to be very tight to fit, and I think a public site plan is a good idea. I think the councillor's onto that.
Anybody else? Oh, Councillor, I wouldn't mind making a few comments and allow you to go last and wrap up, but it's up to you if you want to go now. Okay. So I appreciate councillors' attempts at making this better, but this is the same song that we hear sung here over and over again. And I appreciate Deputy Mayor Helmer's comments about pushing the envelope. I feel like we're always trying to cram a size 8 foot into a size 7 shoe. And I don't think our goals of intensification and higher density has to lead to highest density and highest possible use on one particular lot. I'm also not buying the argument that we're saving trees elsewhere by taking down every tree on these three existing properties. I think what we try to avoid is the sprawl, which tends to gobble up agricultural land. And if it's agricultural land, generally there aren't a lot of trees on those sites. So I think our goal, since most of the trees exist on private lands, our goal should be to save as many of those private trees as we possibly can. And I have seen developments in Ward 5 where they excavated right up to a very lovely, mature, old tree, which of course came down in the middle of the construction phase and actually landed on a neighboring lot and caused damage, and that civil issues ongoing now. So I think a huge priority for us is to spare that kind of problem on the neighboring properties. If we're going to talk about redevelopments and infill and developments that are going to change the land use in the area, then the least that we can do is protect private trees on neighboring properties. When I see the renderings that are presented to us, I don't see any trees. I don't even see drawings of trees, which generally applicants try to show us. I don't think that potted plants will provide adequate screening to neighboring properties. I think that brick wall is a problem, and I do trust staff at the site plan phase to ensure that is looked at really, really closely. I appreciate the H5. I think it's absolutely necessary here. And we always say at this committee that one-off development applications don't set a precedent. Maybe we don't say it at this committee, but I know I've heard it from staff over and over again. This isn't a precedent. We just do this. This isn't, we have to judge every application on its merit, and everyone is a one-off, and then it comes to this committee and we hear over and over again, well, that development happened next door, so therefore it makes sense that this development should be approved as well. It is precedent setting. We do set precedents with every application that we approve here. And I'm glad Councillor Turner spoke about our efforts to limit the height on that 5-story building that did go in the neighboring lot. I think we should look as much as possible at mitigating the effects of this proposed development on the existing neighbors that are in the area. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and I want to thank the community for coming out, and I really appreciate your concern as your community changes, and it has changed. The apartment to the west, 5-story, came in, parking behind, a lot of green space behind. This is an application that's going to be directly in front of you and to the side that is, again, the density is driving the concerns that you have, but we're going to have some kind of intensification. And I know the community understands that. It's important to have that H5. We know that site plan process, a lot of the questions around noise and lighting are going to be directed through that site plan. But really, this is where we have the conversation when we change the zoning. This is important, and I really hope that the committee will support the H5, but also adding the protection of the preservation of the trees. This is a pretty tight development that, unfortunately, there are condos. The condos came there first. Probably it's better than the houses that are there now. But the reality is we're going to get this intensification. It's going to happen. And it is important to create that buffering and privacy for the community. It is something that I have learned with these infill applications. How we do them are different in every community, and we need to do this intensification. So it is a balancing act, and I'm hoping the committee will support the recommendations as noted.
Councillor Squire.
I haven't said anything yet, so I'll just weigh in. I've heard a lot of different information from different people, and I have to say that I like to be consistent. I like to make sure that we're doing things in one area that we're doing in another. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a development with buildings where the community was very upset that there wasn't underground parking and didn't like all the surface parking lots. And so that was the argument, was we want to see underground parking, not surface parking. And I think it's quite amazing that this is going to have underground parking for this density. And just, you know, I listened to all of the points from the community, and they were very well made. You made it very easy because you were very concise, direct as to what your concerns were, which is extremely helpful. You should maybe, if you could join council, I'd be thrilled to see that kind of really clear argument. And I've heard it, but I don't see that this is against the policies we have in place, what we've done in the past. I think it's actually very consistent with what we've done. If I was in your shoes, I probably would not like it either. But my job is different than that, so I'm sort of persuaded by what I've heard, and from Councillor Turner and Deputy Mayor Helmer. I am concerned about the trees, however, and I think that's something that's going to have to be looked at very carefully in site planning, but understanding that the underground parking has some influence on that, so that's where I am.
Thank you, committee. So I've asked staff to call A and B and then C separately. And so Councillor Hopkins has moved the staff recommendation with some amendments. Is there a seconder for her motion? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer. So we'll first vote on A and B.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And now I'll call item C. And after Councillor Turner.
Yeah, there's one amendment that I agree with. I agree with H5. The second amendment, with respect to it, I think it's covered already in there. I don't like to see redundant clauses in motions, so I'd like to vote on that separately because I would like to vote against it.
So we'll call C 1, 2, 3, and 4.
We already voted on the H5.
Yeah.
We already voted on the H5. So we'll vote on C1, 2, and 3 first.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, so just to reiterate, we've voted on A and B, which were the rezoning bylaw portion and included the H5 holding condition, which means a public site plan. So when the applicant applies to move forward with the building permit, there's another public meeting like this where we talk about the individual issues around site plan, and the public will again have the opportunity to come and speak directly to committee. Now, we have voted on C, 1, 2, and 3, which were the analysis of the lighting, the noise study to mitigate noise impacts, and the enhanced boundary landscaping. So we've voted on those. Now we will vote on C4, which is another one of Councillor Hopkins' amendments to, for the preservation of trees. So I will call C4 now.
Through you, Madam Chair, we inadvertently included 5 in that motion, so it should be just C4. So you're voting on C4, and then we'll have another motion on C5. So C4 is the protection and preservation of trees along the northerly boundary, both shared and within the boundary vegetation of the subject property, with the exception of the invasive species and hazard trees.
Councillor Helmer.
I believe Councillor Turner, not to speak for him, I think his objection applies to both, so we probably can just vote on them together. I think he thinks they're all redundant, so.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And I will return the chair to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. And so the motion was passed then, and the recommendation. And I know the community would like to leave their presentation with the city clerk as well. Can that be done? I think the city clerk is probably going to go up and get the presentation so it could be included in the agenda. And again, thank you to everyone. I want to move on now to 4.1. This is the Chair of the Board of the London Downtown Business Association request to amend city bylaw CP2. I understand that the clerk needs to make these changes, and it's just basically letting the clerk make these changes, from what I understand. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think Mr. Gallagher is here, is he, to speak to some of these requests. I recognize the intent of the Board of Management size, which was something that we encountered when we first had to redo this. The second part, however, concerns me a little bit is the quorum question. That quorum shall be made up of those who attend, which is kind of counter to almost every rule book on meetings and provisions. I can't support that. So I'm not sure if there's anybody to speak to that. There's some rationale that's given in there as to why they want to do that. The current bylaw is open to interpretation. It could be assumed that a meeting of the membership requires half the total membership in order to carry out business, which is difficult and unattainable. If that's the case, why are you trying to make the board bigger? It makes it even more difficult to attain. So I was fine on its own on the suggestion of expanding the board, and then once they introduced the quorum question, I started to have concerns with this. So I'm not sure if there is anyone to speak to this at all, but it doesn't look like it.
The city clerk is not back yet. She might have a comment, but I don't know if that is helpful. But Deputy Mayor Helmer may have a suggestion.
Well, I don't have a direct answer to Councillor's question, and I think on the issue around the quorum, I'm aligned with what he is saying. I did want to clarify that the quorum is applying to the meetings of the members, not the meetings of the board. Right, so expanding the board really has nothing to do with the number of members you need to have present to have quorum for your meeting of members. These are two different things, both in the bylaw, but they're really different, so.
Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the clarification. That makes sense.
Councillor Squire.
I think if the organization thinks needs a larger board, I think the rationale for that is there. And I think we should support them in that if that's what they feel is necessary. The quorum is another issue. I mean, it raises all kinds of potential concerns. If you say your quorum is sort of whoever shows up, it's very difficult. And I think they'll have to come up with something more specific than that before I would vote for it.
Thank you. I wonder if the city clerk could speak to the letter that we've got here, since we do not have a delegation.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is similar to other requests that we received from Argyle, Hyde Park, Hamilton Road. The recommendation is for me to report back. It doesn't necessarily mean I'll be recommending to you everything that they have asked for, but the report would indicate what is being recommended. So I would not assume that you're necessarily agreeing with this. You just asked me to review and report back with the draft bylaw.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Well, that was very helpful. I'll move that recommendation. I think that's an appropriate way to handle the request from LDBA.
Thank you, and I have a secondary in Councillor Cassidy as well.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Moving on to 5, any deferred matters, additional business? I see none. And moving on to number 6, adjournment. Oh, just before we move on, if you don't mind, committee, I would like to just make a comment. Given the Urban Design Awards are on this year for the first time, we're having a People's Choice Award. So the public can go on to get involved. .london.ca, and they can choose themselves, and voting is open until October the 30th. The awards are going to be presented at Museum London on November 7th. It's really exciting. I was part of the submissions that I hung out with some architects, landscape architects, planners from outside of the city, and it was a really educational and eye-opening experience. So with that, I'm looking for adjournment. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? Good night.